So let us begin. I'll begin with David Hollinger. I'll read his credential. He's a Preston Hotchkiss Professor of History Emeritus at the University of California, Berkeley. He's also my old mentor. Hi, David. He's a former president of the Organization of American Historians and elected member of the American Philosophical Society and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. His books include Post-Ethnic America, Beyond Multiculturalism, Science, Jews, and Secular Culture After Cloven Tongues of Fire, Protestant Abroad, and Christianity's American Fate. I believe this is your last book.
Correct.
Please.
For the first time in American history, we have a major political party with a vested interest in keeping the educational level of the voters low. Now, this is in some ways an astonishing fact about the history of the United States, which has generated remarkably little explicit discussion. My paper for this journal, for this issue of the journal, deals with three questions about this reality. One, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where the Republican Party is so committed to keeping education low? Second, what does this change in the public life of the United States do for universities? How does it change the situation of higher education? Third, in this specific setting, this relatively new context, what can universities do to maintain their integrity as knowledge-centered institutions committed to the discovery, the dissemination, and the defense of truth? Now, of these three questions, I think I have the most to contribute as a historian to the first of these, how did we get here? So my brief remarks here will be mostly about that. Before I get to that, I will say with regard to the other questions, the second question, like what has this done to American universities? Remarkably, it has put higher education in the situation of being much more identified with the policies of the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. Now, if you think about what education can do for people's response to the public issues of our time, pretty quickly you can say that education does certain things. Education enables people to better understand the evidence for global warming. Education better enables people to appreciate the value of vaccines. Education better enables people to understand that the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow has a debilitating effect on the descendants of people who experienced it. Education makes it easier to understand how women's lives can be extended and expanded as a result of reproductive choice. Education makes it possible to understand the Nakba as a basic feature of modern history. Education makes it possible to be skeptical about the QAnon conspiracy theories that are so prominent among Republican voters. Education makes it possible to be more easily persuaded of the evidence about who won the presidential election of 2020. Education makes it possible to more easily see through the lies of Donald Trump. Now, that's just a condition that turns out to put higher education and an advance of education at greater odds with Republicans. The Republican Party is, after all, the party of Earl Warren and Thomas Dewey. The Republican Party is the party of Nelson Rockefeller that built the State University of New York. The Republican Party is the party that did more than the Democrats to build the University of California system. The Republican Party has produced senators and governors of stature throughout modern history. That's not the case now. So that's a really important change. The other question, the last question that I've asked about, what do we deal with all this? How we defend ourselves in this setting is made extremely difficult because of our greater sensitivity, and I think that's a true statement, our greater sensitivity to the social injustice that surrounds us. Our greater sensitivity to that social injustice makes us tempted to fall into a trap. The trap is to accept more than our share of responsibility for the injustices that define the society. The trap is for us to take on more things. After all, the unstated motto of the people in the United States who systematically refuse to provide basic education and social services to a lot of people that need it, their basic motto is, let the professors do it. Let the universities come in and make all these changes. Let the universities pick up the social pieces that are left lying around the floor of the United States as a result of the systematic failure of other institutions to do their job. So the temptation for us is we will do it all. We will do it all. And that leads to a lot of terrible mistakes, one of which is the requirement, the recommendation that applicants for faculty appointments sign DEI statements. Now, a number of us have been campaigning against this for a long time, but of course now, if you've read the New York Times as the digital edition today, the University of California is now doing away with this, but it turns out that it's listed as a conservative triumph. So all of us who are advocating against this on the basis of academic freedom are now characterized as conservatives. That's an example of where an effort to turn universities into all-purpose engines for social reform has diminished our capacity to maintain our integrity as knowledge-centered institutions. Now, the other question, how did we get there? It's interesting that the matter of education and the political parties did not become prominent in public discussion until this last election, when the pollsters turned out to discover that the ethno-racial and gender distinctions, which we've been led for so many years to believe explain everything, weren't as good at explaining the results of the election of 2024 as educational level. But actually, the differences educationally are not new to 2024. Donald Trump did not campaign in high education states in 2016 or 2020. Trump did not make any effort to win the electoral votes of any of the Eastern Corridor states except Pennsylvania, and he made no effort to do any of the Pacific states of Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii. Going back to 2016, before Donald Trump took over the Republican Party, the Republicans had already given up almost all states and congressional districts with high educational levels. In 2016, of the 32 senators that represented the high education states of the East and the Pacific Coast, there were only 2 senators from the Republican Party. Systematically, year after year, the Republican Party gave up on higher educated voters. Now, why was this? There are many things that go into this, but the key, I think, was the decision of the Republican Party to adopt the Southern strategy. Now, we've all read about the Southern strategy. There are 2 things about the Southern strategy we don't usually read very much about. They were not hidden, but we haven't read much about them. One was, it was a religious strategy, because evangelical Protestants are by far overrepresented demographically in the same states that were relevant to the Southern strategy. Second, those are the same states that have the lowest educational level, by and large, in the United States. We need to begin talking about the Southern strategy as also a religious strategy and as an educational strategy. Now, the legacy of that is that the Republican Party finds out that the voters that they reach that way are really reliable. You can count on them. And as a result, they become increasingly disinclined to do anything that violates their interests and sensibilities. Gradually then, the Republican Party is captured by its evangelical client. And so today, at a time when the United States is experiencing greater and greater secularization, we have and increasingly religious politics. So our situation today is that an increasingly secular society is saddled with an increasingly religious politics. The Republican Party has been captured by its evangelical client.
Yeah. You can